Guantanamo Bay, a high-security prison where justice feels more like a fantasy than reality. So, what's really going on behind those razor-wire fences, even as the world condemns it? The United States, the most powerful nation on Earth, created an island outside the law, where torture is not just allowed, but used as a tool to get answers. But wait, isn't torture illegal? Then why does it continue in this secretive place? It's a place that contradicts everything America says it stands for. And what role do leaders like Biden and Trump play in this ongoing nightmare? The truth is buried deep within the shadows of Guantanamo, and it's time we uncovered it. What if the mysteries of Guantanamo finally come to light? The basic pillars of our legal system might collapse. Let's rewind to 2002. The world was still reeling from 9/11 when the US government opened the gates to Guantanamo Bay, a detention camp where justice seemed optional and human rights took a backseat. Since then, nearly 800 men from 48 nations have been sent there. Many endured years of torture, indefinite detention, and a legal limbo with no end in sight. But why were these detainees denied the protections of the US Constitution and Geneva Conventions? Here's the devastating twist. President George W. Bush created Guantanamo as part of the War on Terror and as a legal loophole, labeling inmates illegal enemy combatants. One label, one devastating consequence. This redefinition stripped them of any legal rights, justifying practices that would otherwise be illegal under both U.S. and international law. By May 2003, Guantanamo held 680 prisoners, yet the vast majority were never formally charged with crimes. Bush's administration argued that legal protections didn't apply because Guantanamo wasn't on U.S. soil. Critics, from humanitarian groups to legal experts, called it a flagrant abuse of human rights. Behind the towering walls and razor wire, Guantanamo became more than a prison. It was a covert CIA testing ground, a place where enhanced interrogation techniques were pushed to their limits. Methods included sleep deprivation, beatings, and waterboarding, shattering detainees physically and mentally. These methods, justified as necessary, eerily mirrored the brutal tactics of criminal syndicates. As the number of abuse reports rose, groups such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International presented a disturbing image of captives being tortured physically, mentally, and inhumanely. As early as 2003, the International Committee of the Red Cross expressed concern about the serious psychological harm inflicted on detainees. In 2009, President Obama promised to close the facility within a year, but congressional bipartisan opposition thwarted his plans. The number of prisoners decreased to 41 during his rule, yet controversial practices such as military trials persisted. When Donald Trump took office, he made it clear that Guantanamo Bay would remain open no matter what. He totally reversed Obama's policies, arguing that it was essential for national security. So, what drove Trump to keep it operational? Was it politics, power, or something else?
We have no choice but to annihilate them. We must be able to detain and question them. Terrorists are not merely criminals. They are unlawful enemy combatants.
One thing is clear, he didn't make that decision alone. In January 2018, during his first State of the Union address, President Donald Trump made a bold move when he signed an executive order keeping Guantanamo Bay prison open indefinitely. He made it plain that terrorists were unlawful enemy combatants and that Gitmo would continue to be the place for their detention. Despite Obama's best efforts to close the facility, Trump intervened and made it clear that Gitmo would remain open. Millions of taxpayer dollars were invested in expanding military courts during his presidency. The move was criticized for being more political in nature than a significant shift in policy, according to John Bellinger III of the Council on Foreign Relations. The ACLU raised alarms about the questionable methods used to capture detainees, many of whom were sold to American soldiers for bounties. One fact, however, stood out amidst all the controversy. Just one prisoner was set free in Trump's entire term. Fast forward to 2021, and Joe Biden took office with a pledge that echoed the Obama administration, closing the notorious Guantanamo Bay detention facility. It was a bold statement, an opportunity to stop the period of indefinite detention that had haunted the United States for almost 20 years. But his actions have given the impression that he is not. On one hand, his administration has approved expensive prison renovations, fueling speculation that Guantanamo is here to stay. On the other hand, he has released 13 detainees during his presidency, raising hopes that he will still fulfill his pledge. But closing Guantanamo is easier said than done. Biden quickly learned that this wasn't a simple task. So what was his next move? Did he give up on the plan, or was there something else up his sleeve? Biden wasted no time in the early days of his presidency. He made it obvious that he meant business when he assigned a dedicated agent, Tina Kaidenau, to supervise the detainee transfer. The goal was clear: a deliberate and thorough process aimed at reducing the number of detainees and eventually closing the prison for good. However, the path forward was obstructed by significant hurdles, the most formidable of which was Congress. Politicians, particularly those focused on national security concerns, had passed defense bills containing provisions that prohibited the transfer of detainees, thus complicating any plans for closure. In fact, Biden found himself having to sign a $770 billion defense bill into law, which further restricted his ability to act. Despite these setbacks, the administration remained committed to the closure process, even as the number of detainees at Guantanamo dropped to just 35, with 20 already cleared for release. Did you know it costs a staggering $13 million per year to detain just one prisoner at Guantanamo Bay? The total cost to operate the entire facility is estimated to be between $500 million and $600 million annually, money that covers infrastructure, maintenance, and personnel salaries. Yet, as of January 2025, only 15 detainees remain at the Guantanamo Bay detention facility. This follows the recent transfer of 11 Yemeni detainees to Oman, part of ongoing efforts to reduce the detainee population and move toward closing the facility. A dramatic twist has emerged. 3 of the main suspects in the 9/11 attacks have reached a plea agreement that could dramatically alter the course of Guantanamo Bay's legacy.
Now, in other news, 3 men accused of plotting the September 11th terrorist attacks in the U.S. have agreed to plead guilty to avoid a possible death sentence.
But here's where it gets even more dramatic. 3 of the main suspects in the 9/11 attacks have reached a plea agreement that could dramatically alter the course of Guantanamo Bay's legacy. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, alongside Walid bin Attash and Mustafa al-Hawsawi, have agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for life imprisonment without the threat of execution. The charges? Terrorism, conspiracy, murder, and hijacking, directly linked to the deaths of 2,976 innocent lives on September 11, 2001. This monumental plea deal raises troubling questions. Is this real justice, or just a political maneuver to end the never-ending saga of Guantanamo? Khalid Mohammed's story pulls back the curtain on the dark and disturbing reality of what happens behind the walls of Guantanamo. When he was captured in Pakistan in 2003, he underwent brutal interrogation techniques, including being waterboarded 183 times, kept awake for 7.5 days, confined in isolation for extended periods of time, and detained nude. These tactics, often called torture, made his case more complicated. However, behind the court cases are real people, real victims, whose lives were destroyed by the events of September 11th. At Guantanamo Bay, the law has often been bent, broken, or erased altogether. Most of what we know comes from leaked documents, detainee testimonies, human rights organizations, and CIA torture reports that detail the interrogation techniques used by the CIA on detainees during the War on Terror and counterterrorism strategies. For over 2 decades, this high-security prison has been a place of unimaginable suffering. More than 150 individuals, including vulnerable Afghans and Pakistanis, were detained for years without charges. Take Mohammed Sadiq, an 89-year-old Afghan who was held in extrajudicial detention for several years under internment serial number ISN 512. Captured at his home in Shaman, Afghanistan, Sadiq was no military figure. He was a civilian with political knowledge, consulted by the Taliban, and served as the director of an orphanage. He endured physical abuse at both the Kandahar and Bagram detention facilities before being released in 2007 and repatriated to Afghanistan. Then there's Naqib Ullah, a 14-year-old boy detained in 2003. Captured by the Taliban, he was forced to join a warring tribe. After about a year in detention, he was released in 2004 and sent back to Afghanistan. But what justified their detentions? Arbitrary and absurd at best. Indicators of terrorism included owning a Casio watch or carrying $100 banknotes. Their crime? Simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The truth is, only a small number of detainees were ever formally accused of terrorism. But that's just the beginning. Nearly 100 prisoners, many suffering from depression or psychosis, were subjected to unspeakable interrogation techniques. Abu Zubaydah was waterboarded 83 times, just one example of the brutal methods used at Guantanamo. He was one of the first detainees to endure this form of torture after his capture in 2002. Beyond waterboarding, detainees were subjected to mock executions, prolonged shackling without food or water, and forced to bark like dogs. Some, pushed to the brink of desperation, resorted to extreme measures like one detainee who tore out his own hair in a state of near unconsciousness. This was a control mechanism that may have destroyed innocent lives. America's strength has always been rooted in its ideals: justice, fairness, and the rule of law. Yet Guantanamo Bay remains a glaring contradiction, a place where those principles have been tested and far too often betrayed. It's more than just a prison. It's a symbol the world watches closely, reflecting who we are as a nation. As the 2025 trial unfolds, Guantanamo stands at a pivotal moment in history. Will it bring long-awaited justice for 9/11 victims, or will it remain a shadowy relic of secrecy and unchecked power? This moment isn't just about detainees or trials. It's about defining our legacy. The world is watching, and the stakes have never been higher. What will our story be? Join the conversation. What do you think? Is it time to close this dark chapter, or does it still serve a purpose? Let us know in the comments. Even one sentence makes a difference. If you've made it this far, you're part of the underworldly family, uncovering the hidden truths, mafia tactics, and untold stories of our world. Don't forget to like the video if it sparked a thought, and hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Curious about where the most dangerous criminals in the world are kept? Check out our previous video, The 7 Highest Security Prisons. You won't believe the extreme measures taken to keep them inside.